what kind of image of China he's trying to portray, and I think that's important. But I really do believe that the biggest breaking point in Chinese foreign policy from our perspective was in 2008, 2009. Because I think the financial crisis had a fundamental impact on the way the Chinese Communist Party viewed the nexus of domestic political stability and foreign policy. They were very concerned that this traditional economic model of growth that helps keep them in power was not necessarily stable because the international economy wasn't stable, and China had linked itself very tightly to that international economy in ways that produced a lot of jobs and quite a bit of legitimacy for the Chinese Communist Party at home. At the same time, there were expectations within China, partially drummed up by the party's own propaganda machine, that said that China's time had arrived, that the United States was not so strong, the United States was not very powerful, because after all, the United States was the center of the financial crisis. It was the cause of the financial crisis by most measures. And as a result, the United States lost a lot of power and prestige in a hurry. And this was the China that Kurt Campbell and the very able people like Jeff Bader, who started in the first term of the Obama administration, inherited. And that's the China they had to deal with in East Asia. And I say the policies, I like the policies. I don't like the pivot, but I like the policies that were under the pivot. And I think that one of the problems that I have with the pivot is I thought that the language fed very well into a narrative in China about what the United States was going to do as it pulled out of Iraq and Afghanistan. It was going to come after China. And the problem with that is it made it harder for those who had advocated a very successful policy in Chinese diplomacy from 1997 to 2008. From the time of the Nye Initiative, which Kurt was involved in, really got China's attention and made China think, we really need to get along with our neighbors for our own national security. And we should reassure them through multilateralism, through economic engagement. That was a very successful run in Chinese diplomacy in that period. But that position was based on the notion that if you don't go that route, the United States is going to tighten its security relations with its neighbors, with our neighbors, and we're going to end up in a worse place. After the financial crisis, that argument was harder to sell. And after the pivot was rolled out, that argument was harder to sell. And it wasn't just the 2010, 2011 period that was described here. It was Secretary Clinton's first trip to China, to Asia, substantive trip to Asia, which was in July. It was her second trip, I believe, in which she said, we're back, which was this notion that we're coming back to Asia. We're going to leave these other wars and we're going to come back to Asia. That really was the pivot. And I think that's well described in this book. Kurt identifies the pivot as something that really was from the beginning of the first term of the Obama administration right through. It just had different wording, right? Mm-hmm. And it feeds into a kind of nationalism in China that makes it harder for moderate arguments to win debates, which is what a big component of U.S. foreign policy towards Asia should really be about, that is assisting those in China who believe that it's in China's long-term interest to have very constructive, less distrustful relations with its neighbors. Let them win the arguments. And I think that one way to do that is, as Liz put so well, when China behaves in a destabilizing way or an assertive way, whatever term you want to use, that there's pushback, not just by the United States, but by China's neighbors. And I think the policies that Kurt and others put in place allowed for that. And the big contribution, I would say, the biggest contribution of the Obama administration was not in the military sphere. Pretty much all the military components that are associated with the pivot were in train in the Bush administration. These things take a long time to go through, right? They're good policies. It's good that a lot of them were maintained. I wish there were more of them. And it's not so much in the economic sphere. The TPP was created by 4 non-American APEC members during the Bush administration. The Bush administration started negotiating it with the idea that it would create a gold standard Singapore-style free trade agreement that would then make China jealous. China would then want to join and would open up its economy more, and it would be win-win. But it got caught up in the pivot, and it started to look like something that was excluding China, a policy that was excluding China, which was never really the intent. So I want the TPP to go through for one fundamental security reason. That is that we negotiated that over several years. The Obama administration successfully negotiated, and to the great credit, put a lot of energy into this. and unfortunately got caught up in this argument that it's an aircraft carrier, which it isn't, or it is, if we don't write the rules, the Chinese will write the rules. That's not true either. If we don't write the rules, we're going to live by the old rules. If we want better rules, we're going to have to write the new rules. I think that's a much better way to put it. But if the TPP fails now, after we've asked all of our friends and allies and partners in the region to make domestic sacrifices to sign on to it, we're going to look like weak partners, and that's going to have really big security implications. And that's where the security piece really comes in, and I worry about that greatly. So just to sum up, I think that the challenges that the Obama administration faced in Asia were real and were amped up because of the financial crisis, which they didn't cause, right? So I always have difficulty comparing. But the real goal should be to get China back in that place where it was from 1997 to 2008. It shouldn't be necessarily to strengthen American security posture everywhere at all times in every way. It should be to encourage China to realize that its behavior has led to a lot of these new relationships that it worries about, and get it to alter its behavior. Because if China behaves constructively towards its neighbors and the region is stable, everybody wins. And when China behaves in destabilizing ways towards its neighbors, even when the United States is able to take that opportunity to strengthen its relationship, the United States does not win. It's not worth it. It would be better if the region were stable and if China would behave in a constructive, persistently constructive, and stabilizing way in the region. I do think that's an achievable goal. And I think one of the reasons that it's an achievable goal is I think Chinese security analysts will notice that the overall Chinese portfolio is not really better today than it was in 2008, despite the increased military modernization, despite the artificial islands, despite a whole bunch of things. I listed all that cooperation between China's neighbors and the United States on the military front earlier. I won't go through them all again, but you can go from Korea all the way around to India. None of that would have been possible if China hadn't abandoned that constructive, reassuring policy and that successful policy that China had adopted from 97 to 2008. We should wish they would go back to that and everybody would win, because at the end of the day, it's not a zero-sum game.
Liz, you want to add something?